Hey, what is up guys? So, Pendulum summons are going to be coming out into the TCG on July 11th of this year. So this is officially posted on the Konami website. So now that we know that it is officially coming out in the TCG, let's go ahead and talk about how to get ready to face up against these decks, because these decks are going to be really aggressive and you guys got to be ready to play against these, because if you're not, you are just going to get swarmed by so many monsters and you just might not know what to do, because I know some players are really afraid that Pendulum summons are going to break the game, but there's other cards that really support aggressive playstyle. For example, a card like Soul Charge supports this playstyle as well. So let's go ahead and talk about how to counter Pendulums and the players that run Soul Charge, because I think both Soul Charge and Pendulums will work very well with each other, because once your opponent goes for a Pendulum play, if you happen to stop them with a Torrential Tribute or something that clears the entire board, they might just have the Soul Charge and they're going to activate that and they're going to bring everything back. So you guys got to be ready to destroy multiple monsters in the same turn. So let's go ahead and talk about some familiar cards, and then we're going to talk about other cards that will probably see a lot of play in the game, not only in the main deck, but more so I would say in the side deck if you happen to match up against those really aggressive players. So first off, we'll talk about some slower cards, for example like Mirror Force. Now Mirror Force is a fantastic card against some decks, and at the right moment it is pretty nice, because Mirror Force doesn't target and it hits everything, and you don't lose your monsters, where with something like Torrential Tribute you'd also lose your own monsters. But Mirror Force is going to be too slow, I would say, against Pendulums as well as any deck that's going to run Soul Charge, because the problem with running Mirror Force is your opponent might just make something like Scrap Dragon, they make something like Quasar, which at that point, Mirror Force is just not going to be viable, because they're going to be making cards that destroy Mirror Force before you can activate it, or they're just going to go ahead and negate Mirror Force with another card. They can go ahead and go for a huge play, make a Stardust Dragon, that way they are really safe in that aspect. So Mirror Force would be too slow of a card. So let's go ahead and talk about a little bit faster cards like Bottomless Trap Hole, Solemn Warning, Torrential Tribute. These are all fantastic cards, and I'm sure all of you guys are familiar with them, but you might be wondering, what else can I play? I feel like, I don't have enough copies of Torrential Tribute, because in the TCG, we're only allowed to run one copy of Solemn Warning, Bottomless, and Torrential. Now, there are other decks that can make other things, like, say, for example, Naturi Beast. This will stop Pendulums, this will obviously stop Soul Charge. Dark Simor will be a fantastic card. That will make it so your opponent can't even really use Pendulums at all. Top that off with Anti-Spell Fragrance. Your opponent is going to have a really bad time, because you cannot set your Pendulum cards face down, so at that point your opponent will just lose. So Anti-Spell Fragrance might be a card that you might want to try out, but for the most part that card is kind of conditional for certain decks, and I'm going to talk about more viable cards, I would say. So I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with these cards. If not, you guys can go ahead and look these cards up. We're not going to really discuss these cards too much, but Vanity's Emptiness, Goes in Match, Needle Sealing, Kaiser Coliseum, Reveille of Warlords are all great cards, and I think that a lot of players are familiar with these. Hopefully you guys have seen these before. If not, basically what these do is it's going to make it so your opponent can't really make any XYZs or Synchros depending on what they're playing. Certain decks like YuGiOh, they're all machines, most of them are Earth anyway, so they won't worry about anything like Reveille of Warlords or Goes in Match, because everything is machine and Earth. Needle Sealing is also a fantastic card, but this card has also seen some play. But let's go ahead and talk about other cards that normally don't see any play but have a lot of potential in this game. So let's go ahead and go over the first card over here, Curse Seal of the Forbidden Spell, really old school card, and it's a counter trap card, so that's really awesome. So it says, discard one spell card, negate the activation and the effect of the spell card and destroy it. Your opponent cannot activate any spell cards with that name during the rest of this duel. So that's really good. I mean, most decks that are playing Soul Charge, some players will only play one, but it still stops at one Soul Charge, which is still really, really important. But the thing is, there are other decks that are main deck triple Soul Charge, and the thing is, even though they technically might not be able to use 3 Soul Charges in that duel, what this will do is it makes it so your opponent will have cards that they can't even use. And to top that off, they're going to have that, dead draw, and, making it so your opponent has cards that they can't use is always good in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Sometimes there are certain decks that can run cards like Phoenix Wind Blast that could just discard those cards, but for the most part, that's really good against Soul Charge. But the main reason why I think this card has so much potential is because against Pendulums, because Pendulums, guys, they are half monster and half spell. So this will really mess up the Pendulum levels. If you guys don't know the Pendulum mechanic, I have a video. I'll link down below in the description box if you guys want to kind of understand pendulums a little bit more, and you guys want to understand how to actually perform a pendulum summon, but they have this thing called the pendulum scale. And most pendulum decks, pretty much, I would say, they're going to be playing Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon and the two Magician, well, there's Magician of Chronomancy and there's Magician of Astromancy. And these are going to be the three pendulums that everyone's going to use in the very beginning once pendulums come out. Obviously, we'll get new ones in the future, but these are going to be the ones that people are going to be using. Now, if you happen to stop the pendulum monster, well, it's technically a monster and a spell, with Curse Seal, the Forbidden Spell, that only doesn't make it so they lose their ability to pendulum, but that also means they're going to have dead cards, and that's going to really screw up their ability to pendulum summon, because it works off of this thing called the pendulum scale, and if you ruin one of the numbers, that can really disrupt their deck, because what that'll mean is, let's say you get rid of one of the magicians of, it's either Astromancy or Chronomancy, that's really going to make it so they can only, say, special summon level 5 through 7 of pendulums, or you're going to make it so they can only special something between 2 and 3. So, that can really mess up certain decks. Certain decks, they only go for pendulums 5 and higher or something like that. So that's really going to ruin them. So I think this has a lot of potential against pendulums. This card is probably the best card, I would say, out of all of them. This card is already kind of rising up in price, and this card is actually pretty good against other decks as well. So this card effect is, it's a normal trap card, Darkfall. It says, when your opponent special summons 2 or more face-up monsters at the same time, send those monsters to the graveyard. Then send all monsters in your opponent's hand and deck to the graveyard that have the same name as the monster sent to the graveyard by this effect. Now, this is great for multiple reasons. So first off, it doesn't destroy, cards like Star's Dragon or something like that, that can, protect, you against Darkfall, but this just sends everything to graveyard. So that's already a benefit. And on top of that, it gets rid of everything. So, it's kind of like, Torrential Tribute in that aspect, but it doesn't destroy your own monsters. But what's really good with this is it lets you see your opponent's hand, and if they can't verify all the copies, they actually have to show you their deck. Kind of like when you activate Mind Crush, your opponent has to reveal their hand. Your opponent would actually have to verify by showing you their deck. So let's say they only play one copy of a certain monster that was hit by Darkfall. They actually have to confirm that by showing you their hand and their deck. So that will give you super advantage in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! So I think that this card is absolutely crazy in that aspect. Next up, we have, I would say a less good version of kind of the same card over here, is Deep Dark Trap Hole. Now this card says, when a level 5 or higher effect monster, and it has in parentheses S, which means you can hit multiple, is special summoned, banish that level 5 or higher effect monsters. Now this one will only affect effect monsters, but majority of the time, most people right now don't really play normal monsters. I know there's the Hieratic Rulers that plays normals, but for the most part, most decks, only rely on effect monsters, so this will be able to get rid of everything, well, depending on what they're playing, because, I think this is great because artifacts are going to be a thing, so that can get rid of huge artifact plays, although technically it'll be on your turn anyways, but nonetheless, it's still a pretty good card. Next up, we have a Giant Trap Hole, a really old card over here, but it says, when 2 or more monsters are special summoned at the same time, destroy all monsters on the field. Now, this is kind of going back to Torrential Tribute, where it's like you will lose your own cards as well, so that's just one thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind with the whole pendulum mechanic is, one thing that I think is unfortunate is when your opponent goes for those huge pendulum plays, they're just going to activate Soul Charge if their plan doesn't go through. So you have to be ready, and I really feel like trap cards are going to be very important in the game, because if your opponent goes for that big pendulum play, and then you stop it, and they activate that Soul Charge, and then you stop that Soul Charge, pretty much from there they have hopefully no cards in hand, and you can capitalize off of this. So just as a heads up, next format I would say, guys, is going to be really aggressive. You got to run traps, I feel like, or you got to be able to stun your opponent, whether it's with something like Kaiser Coliseum or something like Goes in Match to prevent your opponent from getting anything out. But this card is fantastic, but certain decks can't really utilize this because you need to maintain a lot of monsters on your side of the field as well, just to be able to make those huge pushes anyways. But Kaiser Coliseum, there's really no downside to it, so I can kind of see this card being a really good card in the future, even if you're not playing a deck like Bujin's, which is a deck that really loves this card. I feel like there's really no downside to Kaiser for the player running the card, obviously. And I think this card is really good in that aspect. Another thing I wanted to mention just really quick is you can MST Pendulum cards once they are in the Pendulum Zone, because that can also kind of mess things up. But for the most part, next form is going to be really aggressive with those Pendulums plus Soul Charge, so be on the lookout for those decks. But if you guys felt like I missed out on any other great, fantastic trap cards that really don't see much play right now, and we'll be ready to have them for our side decks next format. I really feel Darkfall is probably the best card right now, but who knows, maybe they'll release some other cards in the future. But like I said, if I missed out on any cards, let me know in the comment section below. But anyways, guys, have fun playing against those Pendulum decks, and I hope you guys will be prepared because, like I said, next format is going to be really aggressive. And one thing to mention is sometimes, even with a Max C, your opponent can just play the Max C challenge and you just might lose anyways. But thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day. Azneyes signing out.